Sulibira magi iguinan samu sama puso mahalaga dadia nene Bira magi kirida nene Sulibira magi iguinan samu sama puso mahalaga dadia Bira magi kirida nene
half a day. Stiga outro episode na Fanatsu. Dispensa zo. Wow, host me zutalo. Mega in minaput technical. Paugo. And I apologize. We've had a number of technical difficulties today. Siñot Danny Orlino, who was supposed to be our guest, was unable to join the Zoom call. And so siempre para ben reschedule. We'll reschedule his interview for next week. So that, and we can pre-record it, that way we can do it in person, and then we can still hear from him, because as many of you know, for Fanatsu, a lot of the episodes follow similar sort of themes. There's certain things that the community is interested in, there's certain things that I'm interested in, and so we try to have episodes that focus on those themes. So for example, last year, traditional navigation and how it can survive in Micronesia, how it can continue to be revived in the Marianas. That was a very big, issue. And so we had a number of episodes focusing on that. Solidarity with Puerto Rico and with other U.S. territories. We've had a number of episodes focusing on Puerto Rican scholars and activists. What is their movement for decolonization? What does it look like? What can we learn from them? And so there's also a lot of Finot Chamoru. That's a big theme for Fanatsu. But one thing that, as you can see from behind me, that Fanatsu is very interested in is Chamorro music. Chamorro music. And I think my experience may be like many of your, maybe the same as, maybe similar to a lot of you, in that you may not have grown up speaking Chamorro, but Chamorro music was always around. Some people say that once the Chamorro music goes on the weekend, that means that it's time to get up and it's time to work in the yard or do work for Nana and Tata. When you go to stores around the island, even up until today, it's often Chamorro music that is playing in the background. And so for many people, that's the Chamorro feeling that you have. If you didn't grow up on a ranch, if you're not a tetsa, if you don't know how to weave or to carve, if you don't sail in a sakman, at least you know probably who J.D. Crutch is, Johnny Sablan. You've heard Jesse Bias, Jesse and Ruby. And so Chamorro music is an important part of the way that many Chamorros experience their identity and represent themselves nowadays. And so on Fanatsu, we've been talking to a lot of Chamorro musicians, especially those who helped make the transition from the traditional style of Chamorro music at the start of the 20th century, which was samurita, cantan samurita, right? Making up songs, using tunes that were familiar to everybody, and then sort of augmenting it with your own words, perhaps throwing the lyrics, throwing the verses back and forth to each other. Kantan bulatsu, kantan bulatsero, which was, just songs that you would just kind of make up when you were hanging out with people. Of course, there was also church songs and stuff like that. But really, Chamorro music was a hugely organic and spontaneous thing. People would sing, people would make up songs. And if people liked the song that was made up, eventually everyone might know it. And it might be sort of the lyrics that everyone says, but that didn't prevent people from also creating their own lyrics as well, right? But in the 60s and in the 70s, we see musicians come in who, a lot of them were singing in English, singing American pop songs, but they start to record in Chamorro. And Johnny Sablan, who we've talked about a lot on Fanatsu, he is the one who really sort of helps make that transition. And so because of this history, right, it's important to talk to the people who are there, especially those who are still with us, the ones who grew up loving to sing, but because of the time they were exposed to American music, they were singing in English pop songs, right? They liked Elvis, maybe they liked the Beatles, but then they start to switch. And some of them start to record in Chamorro, and then eventually a lot of them start to record and release albums, tapes, eventually CDs in Chamorro. And so for me, that's an important thing for us to analyze and discuss. Sort of what was it in that moment that made it so that Chamorros who were largely singing in English decided to suddenly start singing in Chamorro? You know, despite all the pressures to give up the language, Johnny Sablan recorded Chamorro music, English music first, and then he went into Chamorro. Even Jimmy D was known for performing English songs, started performing in Chamorro. Flora Bazaquan, who you can see her album produced by the Tapfris Brothers is behind me, performed in English and then started to learn Chamorro songs because there was an interest, because people in the community wanted her to sing in Chamorro. And so getting this oral history from all of these musicians about that time and how the music industry was started, it's so important. And so we're gonna talk to Danny Orlino because he was one of those people who was there there at that time, who was featured on different albums, sort of playing the guitar, playing instruments, and then later on went to record and release his own albums. And so I want to, but because we do have a Fanatsu episode every week, and Dispensa Zutatlo, that Siñot Kin Conception made it, but he wasn't able to help Siñot Danny get online. So we're going to postpone that for a later week. But I do want to sort of keep alive the discussion of Chamorro music, though. Just for today, sort of fill this space. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just share some. So one of the great things about Fanatsu is that it's a platform in which a lot of different work can be supported. And so one thing that I've started doing is every time Fanatsu reaches a certain number of patrons, a certain number of people are supporting it. Me and Akli'i, my son Ilahihu, we go and then we take a bunch of Chamorro records that we have or that we borrow, that we find, and we start to digitize some of the songs that aren't available on YouTube, on Spotify, including some that never made the transition to tapes and never made the transition to CDs, definitely never made the digital transition to Spotify or Apple Music and so on. And we put them up online so that people can have them. This actually began because sometimes I would want to, for my Chamorro classes, my Zoom Chamorro classes, I would want to share a song with people, but it wasn't on YouTube and it wasn't online. So then I would literally just put my laptop up to a record player and then play it for people. And so I started to have Akli'i help me digitize them and then put them online. And then eventually it became a fun sort of thing to do, that every time we reach a certain number of patrons, then we digitize, we put in the time to digitize and then put out there some more songs that might be hard to find nowadays. And so I'm going to share some of them, and I'm just going to share a little bit because what I also try to do is sometimes talk about the history of the songs, the albums, the musicians, through sort of little notes. And so the first one was actually playing when we started this episode. And so let's listen to it. Neni by the Regis Brothers from the amazing compilation Mezcla Dos.
Anay oray, anay punhono pa California. Neni, anay lake mo nagwawamas, mas gwinay jamu ay magubdu. Son huwang na'y tiliyaw kumupo, gibat ko na'y lisagwa at toki para beya kumpli. Neni, ay neni nanangadu sa siyempre yung foto, diwat man na tempo. Ay neni tamaguf na dos sa edwa na sinya, taligwi na jata nuhit na dos. Uminiti kurason huwanay tiuliyaw gumupo, gibat ko na'y lisag toki para beya kumpli. Neni, ay neni nanangadu sa siyempre yung foto, diwat man na tempo gidahandu. Son huwanay tiliyaw kumupo, gibat ko na'y lisagwa at toki para beya kumpli. Pumiliti kurason huwanay tiliyaw kumupo, gibat ko na'y lisagwa at toki para beya kumpli. Na toki.
Woo. And so remember, you can find that, and you can find more than 100 other songs on the Fanatsu YouTube page. So go, if you have a YouTube account, Hano para Fanatsu, and then you can you can subscribe, and more than 100 songs have already been uploaded from a lot of different hard to find vinyl that I've been able to borrow, or some of it I have in my collection. And so check it out, because there's a lot more there. So the Regis Brothers, and one thing I do want to preface this with is that if you want to know a lot about Chamorro music history, especially contemporary Chamorro music history, the dissertation of Dr. Michael Clement, who teaches Guam history, world history at the University of Guam, his dissertation is the most complete resource on Chamorro music, and I highly recommend it. He conducted dozens of interviews with many Chamorro musicians in the islands, in the diaspora, and so he has collected the most information sort of on a lot of these different artists. But so the song that we just listened to comes from the Regis Brothers, and so I mean there's a lot of different Regis families out there, but the Regis Brothers refers to Eloy and George Regis, who recorded 4 songs for the Mezcla Uno and Mezcla Dos compilation albums. And so you can see behind me, actually, the first ever Chamorro compilation album is above me right there. That's Casamiento by Johnny Sablon. But after sort of, but the Tzatfris brothers were inspired, encouraged to create their own studio and sort of support their own artists. And in the late 70s, they came out with 2 Mezcla compilation albums. And of course, Mezcla means mix. Mezcla Uno, mix 1. Mezcla Dos, mix 2. And so over here, the song Neni by the Regis Brothers is on that album, Mezcla Dos. And one thing that's really nice about the Regis Brothers, there's not a lot of information that you can find out about them, just because they recorded, they were well known sort of in the 70s as musicians, but then they did not go on to sort of record much after this or perform much after this. But when you look at the 4 songs that they recorded for the Mezcla albums, they break into 2 camps. One of them, sort of Neni, the one that I just shared right now, was an original that Eloy, one of the brothers, wrote, and then they recorded and performed it. But one amazing thing, because if you remember what I talked about in terms of the transition from the traditional spontaneous canto samarita style to then recording sort of fixed musical media, right? So something that, sure, you can share it, you can listen to it on the radio, you can buy it, you can give it to somebody else. But the problem, though, is you can't change it. And that was what Chamorro music was, is that you could always change it. You know, is that you could always make up new lyrics on a new day for the song if you were feeling different, or if you were talking to somebody different, singing to somebody different. But with the Regis Brothers, for that one, there are 2 other songs, such as Sanhadza Dandan and Hinasokunay na Hudansi. Those are 2 songs that their father made up, listening to pre-World War II songs. And then their father sort of took the tune and then made up his own lyrics to it. And so if you're familiar with the song Sanhadza Dandan, it's a beautiful song about the Bubulao area in Talafofo. But it started off, the tune originally comes from a Gene Autry song, which has nothing to do with Bubulao. And in fact, I believe it's a love song. And so it's interesting then that to follow this genealogy, that it starts off as this song in which comes into the island. Perhaps the father of the Regis Brothers heard it on the radio, or he heard a record of it, but he liked the tune. So then he made up his own lyrics to it for something that was important to him. And so Sanhadza Dandan talks about the beauty of the Bubulao area, mentions some of the people that were known in that area. Wonderful song. And so, but let me share another one. And please, if you have any questions, today's episode is a little bit hungan, totally all over the place. Dispensadzu. But really, it's just a chance for me to talk about Chamorro music. I love talking about Chamorro music. And so let me share another song. Let's see here. Oh, yes. Here we go. All right. And so sometimes people ask me, and in fact, I'm inspired to talk about this because of tomorrow I will be holding another live stream for the Guam Museum, Faisini Guam Museum, where I'll be answering some of the questions that people have sent over the last few months about Chamorro language, culture, history, and so on. But one thing that somebody asked is, what is the first song that used the Chamorro language? And as far as we can tell, this song by Bill James, Half a Day.
They say, how are you? In the Philippines, kumusta kayo? But when you are in Guam, you simply say, half a day, half a day. An American replies, I am fine. Filipinos say, mabuti naman. The Guamanians would say it with the click, todo maulig, todo maulig. From Anderson to Nimitz Hill, way down Umattock Bay. Everyone will surely say, Hoffa, Hoffa, Hoffa Day. So if you're coming, then you should learn to say simple little words you hear every day. It's so easy to say, bye if you lay, Hoffa Day, Hoffa Day. They say, how are you in the Philippines? Kumusta kayo? But when you are in Guam, you simply say, half a day, half a day. An American replies, I am fine. Filipinos say, mabuti naman. The Guamanians would say it with the click, todo maulig, todo maulig. From Anderson to Nimitz Hill, way down Umattock Bay. Everyone will surely say, Hoffa, Hoffa, Hoffa Day. So if you're coming, then you should learn to say simple little words you hear every day. It's so easy to say, fly if you may, Hoffa Day, Hoffa Day. Todo maulig, todo maulig, half a day, half a day, half a day, half a day.
Ooh, oh, that song is catchy. That is a catchy song. And so that half a day, that is probably the first, because Chamorros had written songs. Obviously, Chamorros even had recorded some songs or had performed some songs, but it was not common, for them to use Chamorro, right? And this is one of the interesting things that happens when Chamorro music is created as an industry, a modern industry, right? Is because the earliest songs that Chamorros wrote and that they performed and recorded were in English. Fanogi Chamorro, which is what we call it today, but the Guam National Anthem started off as Standy Chamorros, written by Ramon Manalisay Sablon, and it was written in English. And other songs, such as Guam and Paradise Calls You, these were all written in English because there was this idea that you were writing for everyone else, so it had to be in English. And a lot of the images, the metaphors, the language, it all basically focused on very generic island things. A lot of these songs didn't have much to do with Guam, because of sort of just this feeling that, and this is something that you've heard, if you've heard me before talk about this, the Chamorro Renaissance changes this and shifts this, right? Where Chamorros go from feeling like they don't have much to offer the world, so they need to sort of grab onto everybody else's symbols, use whatever America offers to express themselves because whatever they have isn't important, to then through the Renaissance, the cultural awakening, feeling like what they do offer, what they have to offer the world does matter, is important. And that's what we see. But this song still shows kind of the gray area there. It uses the Chamorro language, but it is definitely not necessarily a song originally meant for Chamorros. It's a song perhaps meant to welcome people to the island, especially those from the United States who are coming on military tours. It's but nonetheless, it uses Hafade and it uses Totemaulik. And this would be kind of the standard for future songs, like generic welcoming songs, right? But definitely written probably in the style of being like making Hafade like Aloha was for Hawaii, sort of this generic welcome to people who come from off island. Interestingly enough, though, Chamorros and people on island really like those sorts of songs as well. But one thing that I wanted to point out, the singer for that song, Bill James, was one of the most important and kind of influential Chamorro musicians in the 60s and 70s. And there's very little information on him. You know, he was performing and singing English, later Chamorro songs. He released singles. He did release an album called the Bicentennial Album. But he was very important in terms of being a Chamorro and singing and performing. But there's very little that's written about him or documented about him. And I did find out recently, because I put out a call on social media for if you can connect me to any musicians from that time. And some people told me that Hagas Matai, he had passed away a long time ago. And that even somebody I spoke to earlier this year, Frankie Sanchez, that he had met him in the States a while back, but that he had relocated. But, you know, this is an important thing. If any of you come from families where you have musical roots, where, you know, where you have relatives who were part of the 60s, 70s, even 80s, sort of reviving of, or sort of giving life to the Chamorro language through recorded music, putting out an album, performing live, whatever it was, I'm happy to talk through, I'm happy to talk to them, to document, to tell their story. It can be through Fanatsu or it can be through other means, but we need to learn these stories, because I would have loved to have talked to somebody like Bill James about his life. You know, what was it like to perform Chamorro music back in the day? Because there was only limited opportunities. You know, as somebody who went from performing English to then Chamorro, there would be so much that I would want to ask him, and so much that I would want to ask others as well. And so, you know, speaking of which, I wanted to share Hungan Estigate. Here we go. We're going to listen to a few more songs. We're going to listen to a few more Dispensa Estigate. And some of these you can still hear on the radio, especially on Kish. On Kish, they will still play these songs, but let's listen to one now from the Iriarte family, Marianne.
Esta es la historia paisangan, historia om Mary Ann. Att man tiempo i un erbjud esa Guam. Un song todo el tiempo, agradece mi nalego, vai anuncia que hilotano na senza wa. 19 años de luz. Desde que eu gotei e canaifu un set bin male Susan fama ruhonta Talza mos gilutanu Talza mos pare homu Mary Ann Hagutitlu Usen Waja Puede mohan, guasian tu años, ni patahi, titanatos, ofrecimiento, permanente, o prometijao menenzus, talzamos gilutanu, talzamos parehomu, Mary Ann. 허구채로 고생과자 Puede mojar, wasiantu años, ni patahi, itanatos, ofrecimiento, os permanente, o prometido menanzus, talzamos gilotanu, talzamos parehomu, Mary Ann, hogutitlu, Mary Ann, 허구칫루, 우산과자.
Uy. Ay. Zahuano na kanta. And so the Iriarte family is one of those examples that I was talking about earlier. And so, I'm honored that recently I met with Leonard Iriarte, and I've invited him to come on Fanatsu or to just sit down for an oral history interview to talk about his family. Leonard Iriarte, for those of you who know, is of course a master of Chamorro culture for chanting. He was part of Guma Palu. He was the leader of sort of Guma Paluli'i Ifanlalayan oral history project. And so, but his roots in all of this begin with the Iriarte family, his family, which sang Chamorro music and other music as well. And so for me, it's just fascinating because what I was able to read about his father, John Iriarte, he was somebody who missed home while he was away, started writing Chamorro songs. A lot of them are to English. A lot of them are to English American popular songs. So for example, Marianne, what we just listened to, the tune is to Before the Next Teardrop Falls. But the content of the song is totally different. It's a love letter to Yasaguanya, his wife. And so he just started to make Chamorro songs, made his children, whether they wanted to or not, learn and perform the songs. And, and for me, that's just interesting. What would make it so that at a time when so many Chamorros were not using Chamorro in their homes, in their lives, especially with those younger than them, they were not using Chamorro to represent themselves. What made it so that certain individuals decided to do that, took on the challenge of that, right? Because what we see, and many of you may have experienced this, if you can't speak Chamorro, most people don't try to compel you to learn Chamorro anymore. They just switch to English for you, right? That's one of the differences. Pale Eric Forbes has written about how, Chamorro women and men of a certain age after World War II just refused to speak English. You had to use Chamorro with them. And even if you didn't understand them, then they were just going to speak Chamorro anyways, and it was up to you to figure out what they were saying. Eventually, though, even people's grandparents and great-grandparents become proficient in English. And so if you don't understand them, they're not going to keep speaking Chamorro to you. They're just going to switch to English. So those choices over language are key, because in the case of the Iriarte family, the choice to write in Chamorro, to record in Chamorro, to perform in Chamorro has wider impacts than just the songs themselves, because the songs can keep being played. You can still hear the Iriarte family on Kish, sometimes on KUAM. Their records that the songs that they recorded, they were a part of FESPAC, and their experiences there had a huge impact on Leonard and then others in terms of Chamorros seeking their roots, especially their ancient roots. And then for Leonard himself, sort of that experience, the language politics, the cultural politics, and then how it affects him and influences him and the choices that he makes in terms of trying to recover, restore, reinvent sort of ancient sounding culture as sort of a way of connecting to our ancestors. All of that comes because a father made a choice that he was going to write some songs in Chamorro because maybe he was mahaleng paritanot niya guahan, that he was going to make his kids sing those songs. And so it's just interesting. Those sorts of things are so fascinating to me. And so that's one reason why I began to do this series of interviews with older Chamorros, our manamku, our manyaina, who have recorded, who took on this task of helping keep the language alive, right? And so I want to share one more, because I am almost out of time. I want to share one more, and this one is a little bit different, but this is definitely one of the catchiest songs that I put on YouTube for people to check out. And so this is not sort of a popular song in the sense of like pop music. This is a campaign song, although I guess you could make a pun because it's connected to the popular party if you're familiar with Guam politics and its history. But this is Hey Hey New Day, which was the Berdalio Taitano campaign song in the year 1970.
Buenas hamzu todos, ni mantau to Guam. Hungo kam luhu, ni estibay sangan. Si Ricky Jan Richard Ponasu has system querido, sa intention honesto. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Bota bota jutai tano, bota jutai tano. Modus hobin zaman amku, pamaulik kita nomu. Si Ricky Jan Richard Ponina Judani Gualomu. Ukam sana usama garin pension niya. Hasuita no takwam gani pagota siya. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Bota bota jutai tano, bota jutai tano, bota jutai tano, bota jutai tano. Hamzumani luhu siya ni man demokrat, ipatiday na juda hagasani makakat. Humukan denatan hamdis pajandalala, zatapa lokwi itanota, zatana malalag. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Hey, sa nuevo naani. Bota bota jutai tan, bota jutai tan. Hey, hey, new day is coming. Hey, hey, new day is coming. Hey, hey, new day is coming.
All right, go from Zahud Kanta. I like that song. That is a catchy song. In fact, my children were born generations after that, but my kids know the lyrics to that song because we listen to it in the car pretty regularly. And so my final thoughts for all of this, I just wanted to share that Sadzahu and Anakanta because I like that song. But how many campaign songs can you remember from Guam history. You know, if people put their time into it to write something, to produce it, to put it out there, then we should document it. You know, we should remember it. And so this song in particular represented a historical moment, not just the song, but sort of the moment itself, because that was the first time that Guam, the people on Guam, were allowed to elect their governor. And so the fact that that this song was recorded and put out there to represent that time is very important. But an appeal to everybody, you know, por favor, if you have anybody who was part of sort of this creating of the contemporary Chamorro music industry, or the creating of contemporary Chamorro music, por favor, talk to them, interview them, document it. Or if you don't have the time to, reach out to me, because I'm happy to sit down with them, to interview over Zoom or in person. It can be live streamed. It does not have to be live streamed. But I would love to understand more about how the Chamorro music industry was created, especially because I see us, the Chamorro people, at a similar moment in time. What was happening in the 60s was, of course, that the Chamorro language was starting to disappear. That children, for the first time since forever, were not speaking Chamorro. You had children growing up who heard Chamorro around them, but they were speaking English because maybe their parents weren't speaking to them in Chamorro. Maybe they were hearing English at school and everywhere else they went. And so that was sort of like the first moment where the Chamorro language was starting to quiet. The silencing, sort of the policies of silencing, were starting to have an impact on the people. And we see then that Chamorros at that time, sort of older Chamorros, were using the language with each other, but it wasn't going down to the next generation the way it had before. And that was the same with music, was that the songs that elders sang at that time and that they loved, they weren't the songs that young people liked, which created just another barrier in terms of transmission of identity and language. But that's why we have people like Johnny Sablon, the Tatfers brothers, the Delgado brothers, Isidro Timinglos, Iflora Baza Juan, the compadres, Jesse Bias, Gus and Dahl, Jimmy D. We have so many who create Chamorro music in a new format so that it can be transmitted, translated, and it can be enjoyed by the next generation, right? By future generations. And that helped keep a sense of Chamorro identity. It helped keep the Chamorro language a part of our lives. But we are realizing, of course, that time is coming. That phase is soon at an end. In the 80s and in the 90s and in the early 2000s, everybody's cousin and everybody's uncle was putting out a Chamorro album because it was pretty easy through places like Stella Star Productions. There was places in the Philippines where it was easy to record and then put it out and then release it. And maybe you only did 1,000 copies, maybe you did 3,000 copies. But with tapes, with CDs, it was easy. And we had sort of a lot of expression of just Chamorro's sort of grassroots sensibilities and creativity. How many Chamorro albums are being released nowadays? How many Chamorro songs are being recorded? How many Chamorros are performing music in the Chamorro language? We can see that the changes in the media and the technology have to be adapted to. And especially one thing that has to be adapted to is just the fact that younger people can't speak Chamorro at the levels they could before, which means it creates another barrier for them being able to record in Chamorro and release music in Chamorro and promote and represent the language, right? And so that's why this is important. I want to learn about the choices that people made, the challenges they faced, and understand the impact that they had in the 70s, in the 80s, because I want to then think about the challenges that we face today and how we can have a similar impact in terms of keeping Chamorro music alive, keeping the language alive, keeping this, this movement for cultural awakening alive. But enoha para Paugo. That is it for today. And dispensa zutatlu. So just remember, as an update, we will be talking to Siñot Danny Orlino and Siñot Kin Conception hopefully next week. Hopefully we will pre-record it this time so we can avoid some of the Zoom issues that we faced this week. But until then, sidus masi tatlu put hamzu ni ume egadzanu me ekungok. Adios.